Very good. So, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our second session in our Elul challenge, looking at lessons from Likutei Moharan, the magnum opus, the great work of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. For those who will be watching this on our YouTube channel afterwards, just a reminder that you can find the source sheets. There are links to them, I understand, in the description of these videos. And you can follow along as I go through the lessons. And today we're looking at two lessons, two very short lessons, lesson 222 and 272. A lot of Rabbi Nachman's lessons are very short and compact. Not all of them are quite long. Some of them are very lengthy, and you have to kind of thread the needle. Others are a little bit more direct. And just to remind everyone, what we're doing is we're going through very specific lessons in the Likutei Moharan at the moment, lessons that are considered to be the foundation of Breslover theology, philosophy, ideology. Lesson 115 was the last video. And that was an interesting lesson talking about obstacles and about seeing the divine in the darkness and about not running away from our obstacles, but actually running toward our obstacles and using our obstacles that are put in our path as a way to draw closer to God. And as I was told during breakfast today, right, basically you could almost think of that in terms of the modern terminology of facing your demons, right? Rabbi Nachman is on some level talking about about the idea of not running from your demons, but facing your demons and understanding that God is actually in your demons. God is actually in the obstacle because God loves us, right? And as I responded in pop psychology, he's encouraging his disciples to do their dark work, right? To not think that everything is bright and sunny all the time. Now, you're going to find that very strange when we start looking at today's lesson, because there's also a flip side to that. One thing, though, that you should also understand, although it was never formally diagnosed because there was no vehicle to diagnose it during his time, it is believed, given his writings, that Rabbi Nachman of Breslov most likely suffered from some type of depression. He had some type of mental issues that he was working with his entire life. And you can see this in the Breslover theology. Although there was no formal vehicles to diagnose him, looking back at his writings, this is what we believe, that he truly was struggling with mental issues, and he found a vehicle in Torah to be able to help him with his mental issues. And on some level, I think he was trying then to convey what he saw then to his disciples. So keep that in mind as we go through some of these lessons. So these two lessons, again, both from the first part of the Likutei Moharan, are very, very short. So we're going to start with lesson 222. Okay. So it begins, right? Tzarich lihyot tamid besimcha ve'la'avod Adonai besimcha. Okay, a person needs to be cheerful always and to serve God cheerfully. And even if he occasionally falls from his level, he has to strengthen himself with earlier times when some small measure of light did shine on him. Okay, so basically, Rabbi Nachman of Breslov and the Breslover theology has at its core that whatever you do, you have to strive to do with a level of joy. Now, he's not telling us to be naive. We can see that from the lesson we looked at last week. I mean, not last week, yesterday, even yesterday, Monday, thank you. He's not telling us to be naive about this, but what he's saying is that even when you're using your obstacles and everything to help you draw closer to the divine, you have to understand that on some level, you have to approach this with an element of simcha, okay? Now, that's really difficult. Okay, that's really difficult. It's difficult to have in your mind that every action I take in life, I should take with an aspect of joy. So when you fall from that level, and you will, You will, because there's going to be times when you're just going to be like, I know I am not feeling it right now, and I'm not feeling the joy. When you fall from that level, you can strengthen yourself by remembering that at one time you did. Okay. So I'm not unworthy to do things with joy, because at one time I did do things with joy, and I have to try to get back to and remember those times when the light did shine on me, right? And if I can remember those times when the light did shine on me, then I can understand that, okay, why did I feel that way then? And can I translate some of that to what I'm feeling now so I can return to that higher level of joy that I used to have while serving God and doing all things, right? Your present moment doesn't have to define everything. When you fall, you should be able to go back and remember something when you were at a higher level, okay? Yeah, sorry.
I wonder if this might be a concrete application of that. Literally yesterday, I had a conversation with a cousin of mine who lost her son due to cancer, and we just got into this self-reinforcing pattern of tragedy, and then I happened to say at the time, how blessed were we to have had the time that we had with him. And that lifted her spirits, and she said, thank you for that. Yes, we absolutely had. So there was, right. This is a concrete example of going back in time, finding the joyful aspect, right, of what you had lost.
Yes.
And the deep hole in her heart that she said it fills her every day.
Right.
And that attitudinal shift of saying, how lucky were we to have had that presence in the first place?
And I would agree, right? I mean, on days when I'm really missing my mother, Zichrona Livracha, when I really miss her, I do remember in the past those times that she and I shared. So it's the same. You are right. That example is exactly what it is. I remembered a time when I felt a certain way, and then that I can then bring into the present moment to lift me and motivate me, and hopefully, using Rabbi Nachman's terminology, raise me up, right? Elevate me to some higher level. Now, where does he get this from? Okay, so he uses an interesting analogy, which is the second verse, okay, of the lesson, right? So this is as we see, right, that a number of blind people hold on to someone who is not blind, trusting him and following him. In addition, the blind man trusts his cane. He follows his cane even though he does not see it at all. Okay? This is an interesting idea, analogy that Rabbi Nachman is making. So what he's saying is that as you're going back and you're thinking about those times when the light did shine on you, okay? Remember, okay, that like a blind man, the blind man doesn't see the cane, right? But the cane allows him to walk, okay? Even though in the present moment, you may feel blind, when you go back and think about those times of simcha that you did have, that's like the cane of the blind man, right? You're not seeing it because it's not in your present moment, but even though the cane can't be seen, he trusts it. So therefore, when you go back and you think of those times of simcha, you have to trust that those times of simcha were true and that they can actually guide you in the present moment. You have to trust what you're recalling, just as the blind man trusts his cane. And even if, God forbid, you look back and you even then say, no, there's no times of simcha, there's absolutely nothing, hold on to someone else or to God, right? Just like a blind man, if the blind man doesn't have a cane, can hold on to someone else and trust that person to guide them. Yes?
There's some consistency with the first lesson. When you go into darkness, seeking God, and hear the blind man
in darkness.
Also, there's a contrast between the first paragraph and this one, when he says there's a small measure of light, right?
Right.
The blind man has no light.
That's right. But the blind man has internal light. right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. The blind man has internal
Well,
light.
that internal
Right.
light is the faith that helps you remember.
That's right. That's right. That's right. And what he's saying is, even if, God forbid, in the end, you can't access that internal light somehow, or you somehow feel that there is none, then hold on to someone else that you feel has the light. Or, he would actually say in a lot of cases, hold on to divinity, right? And let that guide you.
This is actually this is 100 years before this became popular philosophical ruminations on technology. Technology is a way for you, it gives you access to possibilities of being, which really came to the fore in the early 20th century. But this predates that. And what he's basically saying here is that the joy becomes your guiding cane, and the possibilities of being open up to you if you have that cane, and that's what you lead with. But if you choose to go without that, this is my interpretation.
Yeah.
I'm sure that there are going to be further elaborations that might actually contradict, but I'm getting a lot.
Yeah. I mean, this is again the interesting thing, right? That sure, in the present moment you feel lost, but you have to start reminding yourself that you didn't always feel lost, right? Because what affects us in the present, as we'll see in the next lesson, truly does define our world, right? So this idea of I feel lost now, and then I fall into this trap of feeling that I was never joyful, or I never can be joyful again, right? And so what he's saying is, no, sit and be mindful and remember the times of simcha you had, right? And use that as the cane, right? Use that as the way to go forward, okay? So, and this is exactly truly what he explains, right? Because in his last verse, right? All the more so a person ought to follow himself, okay? All the more so a person ought to follow himself. That is, since in earlier times the light shone for him somewhat, and he strengthened himself and stirred his heart for God, even though now he has fallen from this, and his eyes and heart are closed. Nevertheless, he should hold on to those earlier times and follow them. That is, just as then he stirred his heart to strengthen his service to God, so too now he should strengthen his heart greatly. Excuse me. My bifocals. Excuse me. He should strengthen his heart greatly and follow the arousal and shining that he had then, even though he has now fallen from it, until after a short while God helps him and God's light again shines on him. Amen. That's the end of the lesson. And then he has a little note saying, see the end of the book for what is relevant here. We're going to do that beginning tomorrow. Not tomorrow, Friday. Because the lesson that he's talking about is the lesson we're going to learn after these two. Okay? So that's exactly what he's saying, right? That you have to trust yourself, right? You have to trust yourself. And you have to trust, right, that those earlier times can, like I said, can actually help you. Okay? And you have to trust yourself even when you don't trust God, right? Think about that, right? Until after a short while, God helps him and God's light shines on him, okay? So even if you feel completely connected and distraught from the divine, right? You then have to ultimately trust yourself, go and look back and know that by trusting yourself, sooner or later, you will rekindle that connection you had with divinity. God will shine on you, okay? There's a lot of faith, but he's saying, don't wait for you to feel, right, that God is even, if you feel, totally disconnected, do it anyway. Go back in your mind and remember the times of simcha and use that, and sooner or later, God will reconnect. Okay. Yes. All right.
Do you just to parse through the nuances?
Mm-hmm.
The nuances. Do you think it's really trust himself or trust joy? Because his eyes and hearts are closed. Nevertheless, he should hold on to those earlier times of joy. And do you think it's and he strengthened himself and stirred his heart for God? But that the trusting yourself, that's almost a byproduct. Is it the
Well,
joy that you trust, and then that will lead you to God?
So the Hebrew is lelech akar atzmo, right? Etzem, himself.
Okay.
So he has to trust himself. Okay. But but I guess you could say, what is he trusting about himself? He's trusting about himself that he actually did experience that joy, right? That there is something there in his past, his or her past, right? That they're trusting themselves and so, yeah. And that's the whole thing, because if you feel disconnected from the divine, well, then you have to ultimately just trust yourself, right?
That's a huge challenge if you're depressed.
Right.
It's a huge challenge.
And that's why I had to preface today's lessons by saying that we believe Rabbi Nachman was dealing with some type of depression, some type of mental illnesses. And this is what he's saying, right? And he's saying this from someone who's doing the work. If you think about it, he's not saying this as someone who doesn't have, right, this aspect about himself. He himself is giving himself in some ways and his disciples advice, but he's even giving himself advice, right? He has to trust himself. Those times when he feels that God just is nowhere, when he feels disconnected, when he has to go back and say, there was a time when, where was the light? I know it's in here somewhere, right? And then he has to find that, and he has to cling on to that and allow that to help him move forward. And he says that he has to trust that ultimately at some point he's going to feel the connection to God again.
Well, the foundational trust must be immense for him to be able to write that.
Well, and that's what he, I think, on some level is saying that right, for the Hasidic sect, and specifically, I think he would even say for all of us as Jews, yeah, that foundation is there. It has to be there, right? Look at what we've inherited. Look at our history. Look at everything about what it means to be Jewish, right? And that then becomes that anchor, right? That you can then attach yourself to and go back and find the light, right? So again, this to me is a very powerful lesson, because it's how do you foster joy, right? Because so many times people say, well, just be happy, right? And he's trying to give you the outline for what does it mean to be quote unquote happy? What does it mean to do things b'simcha?
Well,
right?
Joy comes in the morning after the darkness.
That's right. Joy. And how does it, right? And how does it come in the morning after the darkness? Because you've done the work of actually looking into yourself and saying, I know there was a time. There's got to be, I know sometimes, like, again, we think of it in terms of like pop psychological terms, but this is in some way like before you start like any type of meditation, what do they say? Find your happy place, right? Find your place of calm. Right? What is your place where you want to be? Well, that's kind of what Rabbi Nachman is saying, right? Where's that place of simcha for you? Where's that place that you can go to that the light was shining at some point so that you can use that to go forward, right? Until you can reestablish the connection with yourself, the connection with others, the connection with the divine, right? And use that image in everything you do, right? We all hear this, right? What place do you feel the most calm? What place do you feel, right? Well, hundreds of years before psychologists, were talking to us about that. That's what Rabbi Nachman was saying to his sect, right? Where's your place of happiness? And use that as a well, as a spring, right? And ultimately, if you don't have a place like that, if you have to say to yourself, I don't have that, then, find someone who does and talk to them. Or if you don't have any friends, right, or anything, right, find God and cling on to God and let God move you forward. Okay, so that's this lesson. Again, very short. And now we have our next lesson, also very, very short, lesson 272. This lesson, okay, is going to be based on a verse from the Psalms, okay, Psalm 95, verse 7. So this is, Hayom im bekolo tishma'u, okay, today, if you will hear his voice, okay, that's how it's going to be translated, right? And you're right, this is part of the psalm that says, if but today you would hear his voice, right, then follow God and do the mitzvot. And Rabbi Nachman is going to look at one specific word, hayom. This whole lesson is based on the Hebrew word of this phrase, hayom, today. He has some very interesting ideas about what he feels the word hayom, today, means. Okay? So he goes on. This is an important rule in the service of God. One should focus only on today. Only on today. Hayom. Whether with regard to his livelihood and personal needs, right? He should not think about one day to the next, as is brought in the holy books, right? Because this is what our Tanakh says, right? Our scripture, that you should not think about one day to the next, right? Or with regard to his serving God. He should not consider anything beyond this day and this moment, right? So he's radically saying hayom. Hayom means you don't think of the past, which is, again, ironic, because in some ways you do, right? The last lesson says you have to be able to go back to be able to access that well of simcha, but even so, you can't live there. Where you have to live is in the hayom. There is only this day and this moment, and there is nothing else that should concern our minds other than this day and this moment, and absolutely nothing else. Okay? Now, why is that? Well, that's our next verse, right? For when a person wants to enter the service of God, it seems to him a heavy burden. He cannot possibly bear such a heavy load. However, when a person considers that he has only that day to deal with, he will find it no burden at all, right? So if you don't look at what's happening tomorrow, if you don't ruminate on what happened yesterday, then your burdens should be lessened if you only have the burden of today. If the burden of tomorrow doesn't exist anymore, and the burden of yesterday doesn't exist anymore, and the burden of tomorrow you're not even supposed to think of because it hasn't even been formed. And if you only have the burdens of today, that should be potentially doable, right? That should be potentially doable, right? And of course, the example that his disciple Reb Nosson gives is the whole thing of my God, there are 613 mitzvot. I can never learn them all. I can never understand them all. And then, well, okay, but what could you learn today? Could you only learn one mitzvah today? Then learn one mitzvah today. That's it. Was that a burden? No. Don't think about the other 612 that you have to do tomorrow, and don't beat yourself up because you didn't learn the one mitzvah yesterday. Yesterday's gone. Tomorrow doesn't even exist. If you can do one mitzvah today, then do your one mitzvah, learn about the one mitzvah today, and it's not a burden. Okay? And so that's the whole thing, right? That's how supposedly you get through some of these heavy burdens, because we try to put these burdens, right? If you think about what Rabbi Nachman is saying, we try to put these burdens in the context of this whole, string of time, right? And then that trips us up, right? And then all of a sudden we start to feel the weight of the burdens because we've stretched them out over this timeline of yesterday, today, tomorrow. We're never going to get rid of them. It's all, but if truly this day and this moment is all we have, and all we truly should be focusing our minds on, potentially our burdens can become manageable. Okay?
It's a way to manage anxiety. Anxiety being something that you're anticipating, this huge goal in the future. And so a lot of therapists today say, just focus on what you need to do, the following steps of today. If you just focus on these manageable steps today, and tomorrow you focus on those manageable steps tomorrow,
right?
Before you know it, you look back and you climb the mountain.
Right. But, and Rabbi Nachman would be even more, don't even think about tomorrow's steps. Tomorrow's steps don't even talk about or think about what I'm doing tomorrow. In other words, today is it. He would even go one step beyond what a lot of psychiatrists and psychologists, he's just even, right? And don't think about the fact that you didn't start until today. Right. Just like, okay, what's today? Today is X. That's it.
Yeah.
Boom. Right. And then, right, as he says, in addition, a person should not procrastinate. This is for me because I'm a chief procrastinator, right? This was my particular verse because I'm, in addition, a person should not procrastinate from one day to the next, saying, I'll start tomorrow. Tomorrow, I'll pray more attentively and with the right enthusiasm. And likewise for the other devotions. For a person's world consists only of the present day and moment. Tomorrow is a different world entirely. Okay. Now, where does he get that? Tomorrow is a different world entirely. What do we say every morning in the prayers? No, right? That God renews daily the works of creation, right? In the first bracha of the Shema, that God renews the world every day. And Rabbi Nachman takes that like literally. If God renews the world every day, then that means tomorrow is a completely different world. Absolutely, completely different. Right? It's been renewed. That's what we say. It's been renewed. So that means that there is nothing about it, right, that is like this present moment. Okay. So therefore, right, that's why you have to only focus on the present moment. Because how can this moment help you tomorrow if tomorrow is a completely new and different world? And how can this moment help you make sense of back then if yesterday was also a completely different world, right? If we truly understand and believe our prayers, then what he's saying is this is how it should mentally affect us, okay? That today is a unique opportunity that only exists today and in this moment. He's calling for a sense of radical mindfulness. And this is something that I always point out. People think that mindfulness is some new agey, right, modern thing, right? Some new agey modern thing that was developed in the 60s by the hippies, right? And it's not, right? Our own tradition talks about radical mindfulness, and Rabbi Nachman is grabbing onto that and even boosting it, right, up a little bit. And again, if you think about the fact that this man was probably struggling with a lot of mental issues, right, he had to deal with the present moment in his mind, right? Because if his mind wandered too much from the present moment, right, then it could become disorganized, right? It could become a little bit more fractured. And so he's saying, I can get it together for this moment. And ultimately, that's all God is asking. Get it together for this moment and do what you need to do in this moment, okay? Yes, use your past and use these other things, right, to bring it into the present moment, but make sure that your mind is always in the present moment, right? And that's what he says, right, is the meaning of the verse. Hayom, im b'kolo tishma'u, specifically today, hayom, right? And then he ends with v'havein, understand what that means. Today, right? You got to release yourself from the past, and you can't even, because tomorrow, for all intent purposes, until we get there, does not even exist. Okay, I mean, again, these are, in my opinion, right, some pretty radical teachings in terms of what he's saying as a Jewish person, right? We need to be actually concerned with, right? And I do really appreciate, and for me, again, it's very compelling to look at your day and look at everything and say, well, tomorrow, or to become wound up in, oh, I wish I would have done that yesterday. I wish I would have done something, right? No, right? And that's also then how you free yourself from regret, and how you, I think, Ari, beautifully what you were saying before, prevent the anxiety and worry of thinking about tomorrow, right? Because if yesterday's past and there's nothing we can do about it, then regret isn't beneficial. And if tomorrow doesn't even exist, then how can we worry about something that doesn't even exist, right?
Well, you lived it. Because when I asked, how could you give this course right now and prepare for Yontif?
Right. I told you the answer was coming in lesson 272, right? So, no, and seriously, and that's the struggle, right, at this time, right? So what's the answer? I have to try to internalize this lesson. Yeah. Hayom. Yeah. Hayom. What can I truly do today, right? And that has to be good enough. And that has to be, the foundation for then, if I'm blessed enough to have my next Hayom, right? Because I would even go so far to say, that Rabbi Nachman wouldn't even be thinking in terms of yesterday, today, and tomorrow. What he's saying is it's today. I don't know if I'm going to have another today.
That's right.
Right?
None of us do.
None of us do, right? But he's saying to actually don't just say that as an intellectual statement, right? Because that's another thing, right? Because we do say a lot of these things as sort of just intellectual statements, right? Oh, we don't know. There never may be another tomorrow. Is that just something we're saying as an intellectual statement, or do we actually believe that, really? Right? Do we actually believe that when we go deep down into ourselves? Because that's what Rabbi Nachman is asking us to do, to go deep down into ourselves and say, internalize this. Do you believe this, right? I think what he was trying to do for himself was to actually internalize that and not just have it be a platitude that he says, right? But to actually be like, yeah, there's only today. There's only this particular moment in this particular time. And I don't know if there's going to be another Hayom for me. So, im b'kolo tishma'u, I have to hear God. And I have to hear God in this present moment, right? So therefore, when I go into prayer, I have to pray how I would pray if this present moment is truly it. Right? I have to go out and do things in the world as if this present moment is actually it. Right? And then if I'm blessed that when God renews creation every day, that God renews me, and I get to be a part of that, right, new thing. Because I think that's also hidden in that statement, right? For a person's world consists only of the present day and moment. Tomorrow is a different world entirely. Well, if we're part of that different world tomorrow, then that means we are different people if we get to the next Hayom. I'm not the person I was yesterday. I'm not, right? I'm not the person I'm a renewed person. I'm a renewed creation. I'm a slightly different, renewed Rabbi Cantor Russ. And I'm not the Rabbi Cantor Russ of Tuesday. I'm now the Rabbi Cantor Russ of Wednesday, having been renewed. So do I regret maybe what the Rabbi Cantor Russ on Tuesday did? Yeah, okay, maybe. But that was a different person, right? I now have something new to deal with, right? And I think, again, given what Rabbi Nachman potentially struggled with, think about how helpful that was, right? Okay, yesterday I prayed at this level. Yesterday I felt at this level. That's okay, because today I'm a new person and I can go up or down. And, and you always want to hopefully be going up. But if you feel yourself sliding down and down and down, then try to bring something in, right, from the past. And then ultimately, in the end, don't be afraid to face it, right? Because that's the whole thing. You're going to feel yourself sliding and sliding and sliding and sliding. And when you feel that becomes the obstacle, then go back to lesson 115. God is actually in the obstacle. God is there waiting for you to grab onto God, like the blind man that grabs onto the person who can see. So then don't run away from the obstacle, right? Because in the obstacle is the quote unquote person, right? Is divinity that you can then hold on to, that will allow you to walk until you can regain your sense of simcha, until you can regain your sense of this is the only present moment that matters. So Ari, you had a...
Yeah, I think that there's a wonderful poetry in the combination of these two lessons, because the first one, and even with the last class, because the last one was about sight and darkness. Mm-hmm. And in this lesson, it was using the analogy of a cane and blindness, but then it switches over to heed the voice. And the voice requires no light. And this is in effect a paradigm shift. Again, and is consistent, but which is with last class, but it also marks sort of the Jewish existentialism, which is really interesting And this whole idea of renewal from day to day is actually existentially required in order for us to have a redemptive quality and forgiveness and tshuva. Otherwise,
Right.
there is, if you are bound to the person you were, you can never escape, and you become part of this honor society where you've done something wrong and it stays with you for the rest of your life.
Right.
In Judaism, not only are we given the opportunity to repent and renew ourselves like we're doing Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, but that renewal and that wholeness that you get back is actually greater than if you never fell in the first place.
Yes.
And
Yeah, that's true.
And so just to go back to scriptures, it's like the Sinai, the second covenant, when we sinned with the golden calf, Moses and the people repented for 40 days and 40 nights, and God had entered a stronger covenant than he did the first time. And so I think that that's what's really required existentially in Judaism in order for us to have this notion of forgiveness, this idea of redemption.
Yeah. Yeah, and you are right. We have to, I mean, again, we have to believe, because I said this the last lesson, we have to believe that tshuva works. We have to believe you can break the cycle. We have to internalize the fact that yesterday I was a completely different person. I'm now going to do the work today that I can do, and that's going to somehow change me. And if I'm blessed with another today, I will be a completely different person.
The paradox that I see here, it's almost like a dialectical dilemma, is that I think that this needs to be contextualized to a particular set of issues, because I think that there's a paradox in the sense of all of this being in the moment and finding joy in the moment by looking in the past. What about the joys of future and building and planning? What about the joys of the potentials? Like, I understand, like, if you suffer, if you're always in the moment and you do get, like, is there no, where do you get the planning, the potential aspect?
Right. So I would say that what I would, and this is an extrapolation because I haven't read all of his lessons, so maybe he does touch on this in another lesson I haven't gotten to yet. But I would think, from what I understand, is of his theology and of just his his path in general. It's not that you don't plan. Yeah, if today, in the moment, what you're doing is planning, but that planning can't be, and I will then be assured that I will execute it tomorrow, right? It doesn't mean you don't plan, but it means you don't plan with the ideology that this is something that's going to happen, right? It's why in Judaism, right, we don't say Mazel Tov until after the wedding, or we don't have a baby shower, right? Because, right, and we always say B'sha'a Tova, at a good moment, at a good time, right? Because you never celebrate something that hasn't happened yet. Right. Because you live in the moment, and you plan, but you never plan saying that that's a surety, because you don't know, you may not have another Hayom.
I have a good example. Bonim. The children and builders.
Right. Banim and Bonim. Right. And that's right, because that's the whole thing, right? That your children will be blessed, but they say don't read it as children, read it as your builders. Your builders will be blessed. So I guess blessed, you could say on some level, are those that in the present moment, to kind of tie that to Breslov theology, that in the present moment, they're children and they continue to build, right? But don't fall into the fallacy of believing that your plans deserve fruition, because you may not get another Hayom, right? So if your simcha comes from planning, plan away, but understand that this is, even in that, this is the present moment.
Humility.
I guess,
humble in your planning.
Yeah. So that's how I would know. Again, hope maybe he will address that in some way. Okay. Again, also, just like I said on Monday, think about the community that the Breslovers are living in, right? In the mid 1700s, and early to mid 1800s in Ukraine. And think about this theology being the theology he is expressing to these Jewish people, right? His followers, who are in the minority, that are living in an oppressive government, in Ukraine at this time, right? He's telling them not to be afraid of the darkness, that God is in the darkness. He's telling them to find simcha, right? To find the joy somehow, right? And even if they can't find the joy, to try to cling on to God, to the tradition, anything that can bring them forward. And he's telling them, don't get lost in the past where things maybe were better. Don't think about the program that may be happening tomorrow, right? Don't think about, right? Think about this present moment, right? And live in it and make it something that is powerful.
Lead with joy.
Right. Lead with joy. Right. Again, this is, in my opinion, very radical theology on some level, but it's also, I think, very modern theology, even though it's coming out of the mid 1700s and early 1800s, that on some level, it is something that we can appreciate because we hear aspects of this in modern psychology and in modern theological thought. Right? So this is where this class is going to end, which is good. I mean, we still have a few discussions of this. So these are 2 short lessons where we are going to go on Friday, and Friday's lesson will not be able to be done in one day because Friday's lesson that we're going to start is his famous lesson called Azamra, I Will Sing. Okay, this is one of the core, it's one of the most famous lessons, right? The 2 famous lessons that he did, one, which is I Will Sing, right? And then the other one is his lesson, which we'll get to later in the course after that, about hitbodedut, clinging to God, right? And how to improve one's personal relationship with divinity. Those are 2 of his most famous lessons. This is now just some introductory lessons that are core to understanding who he is, what he's preaching, and kind of what he wants his core concepts to be, right? And then as you're going to see, when we're going to start with Zamera, right? I Will Sing on Friday. That will probably take us through Friday, and I would think Monday. That might be a 2-day lesson, depending. You're going to see how he develops a lot of these core concepts in even more radical ways, right? Again, I hope you're enjoying these 2 lessons. I hope Breslover ideology is challenging you, but also inspiring you to actually take like modern lessons from it, because I believe that, Rabbi Nachman has a lot to say to the modern disaffected world, right? Yeah. And so, yes.
What's the completion of this phrase, live for today, for tomorrow is, there's something.
Oh, well, I know the phrase as live for today, for tomorrow we die. I know that, but I don't. I'm not that so I don't. Yeah, no, I don't. But sorry, yeah, no, it is. I mean, no, it is. Yeah, kind of it. I mean, that's how I sort of know it. I don't know if anyone knows. There's lots of versions of that phrase, but that's the one I always know. Live for today, for tomorrow we die. Or as my grandfather used to say, live for today because the bar may be closed tomorrow. So I mean, there's all so. Yes.
And it is, tomorrow is a different world entirely.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily as depressing as tomorrow you will die. In that, there's an inference that there is still hope and opportunity.
That's right.
But you just don't know.
Right. Because that's what I mean, because that's right, because that's what he says. Ki yom hamocharat hu olam acher legamre. Right? That because to the day after today, that is a completely different world.
Yeah. But also in the modern interpretation, live for today, many people use that as an excuse to once they go out drinking.
Hedonism. Yeah. Right.
Self-satisfy and whatever in meals or whatever it is.
Right. And that's not whatever, right? No, you're not living for today in the present moment so that you can be a glutton or a drunkard or right.
To self-improvement
to connect with God.
And to connect with God and to regain any joy that you may have lost.
Right, right. And the only way you can do self-improvement, at least by Rabbi Nachman's standard, is to forget to yesterday and forget tomorrow. That's the only way
Okay.
you can
It's a
do it.
redirection of energy.
Yes,
Mhm.
right.
Yeah.
Energy into the moment,
Right.
energy into this present moment, not energy into yesterday's failures or even yesterday's successes, right? And again, don't even think about tomorrow, because tomorrow hasn't even been created yet, because this world hasn't even been renewed. There is no tomorrow,
Well,
quote unquote, in the most positive way that can sound, but
Well, there's specific uses of yesterday and tomorrow. Maybe it's not just
Okay.
so much of don't use yesterday and don't use tomorrow, because he's specifically saying use the joy of yesterday for
Right.
today,
Okay.
and then use the aspect that you don't know tomorrow to refocus, to redirect
To
the energy.
redirect.
to joy.
Focus on
So
today.
you do have
Okay.
use of past and future. It's just those are redirectional
Right.
functions.
and ultimately in the end, don't
Well,
Right,
not
Right.
to dwell on the past
right.
and not to think about all the things that could happen in the future, what the
Right.
future has been.
That's right.
right,
That,
Yes.
right.
you know,
And ultimately, in the end, don't be afraid to face your obstacles.
Yeah.
Again, lesson 115 is so core to what he is trying to talk about. Don't be afraid to go into the cloud, to go into the mist, right? God is waiting for you in the Arafel, just as God was waiting for Moses, and Moses understood that. Don't be like the rest of the people that run from the obstacle, right? Confront it, go into it, and see the divinity waiting for you in it. Well, but what did it say? God called to
Right.
Moses,
No,
right?
that's it.
God called to Moses.
Yeah.
So you can make that link,
Yeah.
because God called to Moses from the top of the mountain, and then Moses went into the cloud.
Right.
Right? So the imagery is consistent,
Yeah.
right? Right? God calls, Moses responds to the voice. He goes into the obstacle, not being afraid of it. Why? So that in the obstacle, he can cling on to the divinity that will then help him use that obstacle to go beyond
Right.
into something bigger. So yes, you can see a consistent ideology and symbology so far in his, right, in his teaching. So it's 2 minutes before service time, so we really should go in, and I will complete this recording. Thank you all for being here today, and we will pick up again on Friday with his famous lesson, I Will Sing. Thank you all.
Sorry, I can't stay for services.